Imagine your old friend from Secret Services told you quietly that World War III would begin in 24 hours. China, Russia, the US, and Europe will exchange nuclear strikes. Lucky you, not only can you now flee as far as possible from the impact zone, but also you won't get stuck among hordes of refugees on the border. Besides, transport tickets won't cost you a fortune. You only need to choose a definitely safe destination that you can reach as soon as possible. In this video, you'll find out what countries will suffer from nukes the least, where will there be sufficient food to survive the long nuclear winter. Long story short, what's the safest place to hide out from World War III? Where should you flee from the Third World War if you're an American? During the global nuclear conflict, the most dangerous places in the country, apart from the major cities, would be North Dakota, Wyoming, Montana, Texas, and Georgia. That's where the main military bases and nuclear facilities are located. Well, none of them can be found in Alaska and Oregon. Besides, the Chinese missiles won't definitely reach South Florida. However, here, even without any World War III, you could get eaten by methamphetamine alligators. In any case, an urgent domestic flight ticket will cost you about $700, plus at least $1,000 for a month's rent. However, even in the safest place in the US, clouds of radioactive dust will cover you in just a couple of weeks, let alone the wave of violence and looting soon to sweep across the bombed-out country. What if you go abroad right away? Just $1,000 and you're in northern Canada, which is of little interest to the generals with the big red buttons. Also, it has the lowest rental rates, only $300 per month. But prepare for bitter cold all year round, and the fact that, owing to the total collapse of the global supply chains, to find food, you'll have to hunt for it yourself. And it's doubtful they'll teach you, an American, how to do it, considering how offensively the Canadians have been depicted in South Park all these years. So, if you have no survival skills, it's worth going somewhere south 24 hours before World War III. And no, not to overpopulated Mexico, which, apart from the radioactive dust, will be overwhelmed by refugees from the US. There is Chile. A flight ticket there is just slightly more expensive than a domestic flight in the US, while accommodation is at the level of Canada. The high Andes in the west of the country are a great barrier from both radioactive clouds and an influx of refugees. Chile is an old ally to the US. It has a great climate, favorable for growing fruit and grapes to make wine, plus plenty of seafood. But anyway, in just a few months after the disaster, acid rains will start to fall in the Andes, poisoning everything around. You've got to check options outside the Americas. But for this, you'll need a different starting point. Where can a European, say a French citizen, save themselves from the nuclear disaster? If, after failure in Ukraine, Russia resolves to launch nukes on NATO countries, the whole European continent and Britain will be in the red impact zone. But hope in the region still exists, and it's Malta. You can fly here from France for only $350, and accommodation will cost you $750 more. This secluded island used to be a refuge for the Templars, who built castles here, and they still make excellent shelters. During World War III, you'll experience all the beauties of the medieval siege, as Malta depends on imports for virtually everything, unlike the other European islands. You can get to Iceland at an even cheaper cost than Malta, and you can rent an apartment here for $1,000. It's cold here, but Iceland is of no interest to the parties in the nuclear conflict, and it's utterly self-sufficient, with electricity from renewable sources and seafood. Moreover, as of now, there are only 3 people and 1 Bjork song per square kilometer of Iceland. But, alas, nuclear war can unexpectedly affect this island too. The thing is, Russian missiles launched at the US will be flying over Iceland, and if their anti-missile defense works as it should, a couple of stray warheads may fall right into this area. Therefore, to avoid radiation sickness, you'd better avoid the northern hemisphere altogether. Having spent around $2,000 on the ticket and almost 24 hours on the flight, you'll still have time to find a doomsday shelter in South Africa. It's the most prosperous African country with everything you need for life. In Cape Town, its capital, is a modern, comfortable city where you can rent accommodation for only $400 a month. However, there's one problem. If you're European or even American, then in Cape Town, you can be robbed and killed by members of one of the 130 local gangs, and World War III will only provoke them. Maybe things will be better in Asia. What if you begin your survival quest from the other side of the nuke war, in China? It might seem China's got two wonderful options right close by, Nepal and Bhutan. The Himalayas will give you solid protection from nuclear blasts, and goats will provide you with food. But hold on, there are no regular flights to either country from China. And that's all down to the Chinese government's strained relations with Nepal and Bhutan over Tibet's status. So even if you can make it in 24 hours by bus, nobody's waiting for the Chinese here. And the cherry on top of the nuclear cake is that neighboring India and Pakistan have nuclear warheads and could join in on the war. It'd be a lot more reasonable to spend $1,000 on a flight to Australia, which, owing to its remoteness, has long been considered one of the safest countries for World War III. Though, due to high living costs, an apartment in a city will cost you $1,200 a month. If money isn't a problem, nothing will prevent you from enjoying life on this self-sufficient continent, even in times of the apocalypse. Or would it? Australia has always been an ally to the West, so after the nuclear conflict erupts, a Chinese passport could make you a potential enemy, so it's better not to stay there too long. $500 more, and you'll descend the air stairs on the tropical islands of Fiji or Tuvalu, where you can get by on only $300. It's a paradise for those who love fishing and seafood. But it won't last long. Some recent research shows that the global nuclear disaster will not only cause a global winter. Oddly enough, ocean currents, on the contrary, will warm up. They'll kill almost half the plankton on the planet, which in its turn will trigger a mass extinction of fish, particularly in equatorial waters. As such, in several years, the paradise of Fiji and Tuvalu will turn into a hungry hell. Aren't there any good long-term options for finding a World War III shelter for anyone? Where could a resident of any country survive World War III? Don't hesitate to buy a ticket to New Zealand while planes are still flying. It's an improved variant of Australia. It's even farther away from all radioactive adversities, and not every insect there is trying to kill you. You can reach New Zealand from any point for around $2,000 and rent accommodation for $800 per month. Friendly New Zealanders will gladly accept any refugee. But most importantly, they can feed you well, because currently there are 8 sheep and 2 cows for every 1 New Zealander. Primary resources should be enough for years, even in total isolation. However, this is what virtually everyone on the planet will think. If refugees make New Zealand's population increase to at least the level of California's, thriving New Zealand will risk becoming 2 islands of a hungry ghetto. We definitely need a more exclusive place. Never mind that the Maldives are close to India. It's still hundreds of kilometers of ocean, which, after World War III begins, will isolate the islands from the continent's influence with its radioactive fallout and acid rains. Depending on the direction, you'll have to spend a great deal on the ticket, though accommodation in the Maldives can be as much as $700 per month. Unlike Fiji and Tuvalu, these atolls don't live off just fishing. On Thodo, they grow plenty of nourishing fruits like melons and papayas. So if you don't mind living on the radical vegan diet for years, then welcome. Though you can run into trouble even here, as food is delivered between the islands on boats and planes, and the Maldives don't have their own fuel. So a fruit shortage can occur outside one of the islands, which will trigger bloody fights for resources among the survivors. It seems that wherever we choose to hide out from World War III, we'll bring it there with us. But probably, by pure accident, right before the nuclear apocalypse, you happen to have a $55 million ticket to the International Space Station, and the launch is in a couple of hours. If you take sufficient supplies of canned food, you can comfortably survive the nuclear war in orbit. But wait, one of the missiles gets intercepted, and there's a nuclear explosion in space not far from you. It wouldn't hurt you if you'd stayed on Earth, but the radiation here is not stifled by air. The ISS will turn into a huge microwave, where you'll be fried to a crisp. So, let's hope your special services friend played a trick on you, and World War III ain't gonna start no matter what happens.